Mr. Chairman, you are live.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Senate Revenue Committee, and we're just going to go ahead and get started. The first bill for our consideration is Senate File 70, fingerprinting fees. And I believe that Senator Schuler knows a little bit about this bill, and she will be presenting it to us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, this may be one of the more simple bills that we get to take a look at during our time today, as well as in the future. It's a pretty simple bill. This was a concern that was brought to me by our local law enforcement folks. Many of them obviously have to take care of fingerprinting fees, and it does take quite a bit of time. And we charge $5 for the amount of time that it takes to do this. And I went down to our local police station just to kind of get an idea a little bit more about how they do it, what it's all about. And just to give you a little background, first of all, it's all non-criminal justice searches are based on this positive identification of a fingerprinting card. And unbeknownst to me, I thought that it would be a pretty slick thing. But once you get in there and you find out, by the time they get the government IDs and they do all the paperwork for the folks that are coming in, and then they have to fill out 3 separate fingerprint cards. And quite often they end up having to redo those cards. And part of the problem is some of the folks that do have to get fingerprinted, particularly bankers and teachers, have a lot of paper that they see in the course of a day, and so their fingerprints don't always come out very good. They do have a substance they can put on, which kind of makes the fingerprints stick out a little bit more, and sometimes they'll get you may have to go 2 or 3 times to kind of get a good fingerprint. Also, if you're in an occupation where you work with chemicals or in some construction areas, it's sometimes also difficult to get a good fingerprint. So it does take time. And the $5 fee, if you think about the amount of time that it takes, and if you take one of our policemen off their beat to come in and do a fingerprint or 2 or 3, you think about the amount of money that we spend for them per hour, and the amount of money that we get back. It's not a real good bang for our buck. And so I looked into just a little bit about what other states do. Just kind of wanted to get an idea of the $5 fee. Is that something that's similar to other states, or are we way low? And we are way low. The average, it usually goes anywhere from about $25 to some places, $50 in some places, even down south. This is one of the states below us. There's a state back east that goes clear up to $100 to provide this same service. So, and that was really the bottom line with the law enforcement folks, is that it's not that they mind doing them. They don't mind at all. It's part of their service to us as law enforcement. But the bottom line is it does take some time, and sometimes it has to be redone. And and just to give you another idea, I kind of looked into the biometric fingerprint service that some states provide. That's actually a little more accurate, but some states do it, some states don't. We don't, and so we do use the cards. The big thing is it's the most accurate means that we have for checking records, because people can change their names. Obviously, they can forge documents, and so obviously, if it's a career in which the law enforcement needs a little more information, if they have to do an FBI criminal history check, then obviously there's an additional fee. But for, we're talking mainly teachers, bankers, firemen, policemen, people that work in home health care, insurance agents, state employees, anybody that works with youth, pharmaceutical folks, medical field. There's a lot of people that do, that we do require those. And so it's not something, I think I looked in the fiscal note, it's about 1,600 fingerprint services were done last year. So we'll probably be similar to that. It's not going to bring in tons of money, but even if it brings in $8,000 or $10,000 extra a year by raising the fee to $10, I put it in perspective. The day that I went down to the police department, I had to get a VIN inspection. So I thought, as long as I'm down there, I'm going to go in and take a look at how they do the fingerprinting. The VIN inspection that we do in Wyoming takes about 10 or 15 minutes, and we charge $10. That can be done by someone that's not law enforcement. It can be done by a secretary or someone who works within the police department or the sheriff's department. Whereas, the fingerprinting has to be done by law enforcement. And so just to put it in perspective, we charge 10 for a VIN, which takes a few minutes, and then we charge $5 for the fingerprinting. So the bottom line is we're taking our law enforcement officers off the streets to perform this activity. It takes them quite a bit of time. And, it has to be someone that is licensed. And again, there are fees that, if they do have to go in and do a complete background check because of the type of career that they're going into, there are additional fees, but the actual maximum fee right now is $5. We're just kind of hoping with this bill that we can bump it up to 10. I talked it over with a variety of different law enforcement. There were some that suggested 20, but I think doubling it from 5 to 10 makes sense. It's reasonable. I think it's fair. I think it's equitable. And maybe we'll look at it, maybe we'll want to look at it later on, but that's pretty much the bill in a nutshell. Happy to answer any questions you might have. It goes into our general fund. So I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Senator Schuler. Are there questions for Senator Schuler? Anybody got a question for Senator Schuler? Senator James?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is everyone charging the max of $5?
Senator Schuler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As far as I know, everyone is charging at least $5. I think that is pretty standard across. I visited with a couple of other districts and counties as well. So I think that's, as far as I know, that's the maximum that's being charged. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Schuler. Anything else? Anything else? Let's go to public comment. Anybody in the public want to get their hand up? I don't see any hands up right now. Not seeing any hands up. I'm not sure that something's wrong with your bill. If I'm used to like having tons of people. I can see half these people are for a bill of mine. I can already see that. So
it's pretty simple.
Senator Schuler, I beg to ask, why did you stop at $10? And then we'll go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like I said, after looking around, I would have been comfortable with 20, but I felt like maybe going from 5 to 20 was kind of a big ask. And talking with other law enforcement people, they thought 10 would at least get a start in the right direction. But I think maybe we ought to take a look at it. I mean, if the average goes somewhere between 25 and 50, we're way behind the 8 ball there, and we probably do need to bump it up a little more. But I didn't want to, shell shock folks right away with, a larger increase, I guess. So that's the reason I went with 10.
Senator James.
I lost it. Sorry.
Sorry. If it comes back, you can certainly grab it. Anybody else? Anybody else? And I'm not seeing any hands raised. Danielle, I'm right on that, right? Nobody's in the waiting room wants to testify on this?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
I've never seen this. I've never seen a bill where nobody wanted to testify. So, committee, you've heard the testimony. What is your pleasure?
Move the bill.
We got a motion by Baldwin. And as you recall, we're not requiring seconds for main motions or for amendments. You all can change that if you wish, but that's kind of the way we roll. So, discussion on the bill. Discussion. Anybody like to propose an amendment? We don't open bills up very often. And
Call for the question, Mr. Chairman.
how about an amendment first? Come on. We should raise this. We are the Revenue Committee. Let's make it a revenue measure.
I'll make an amendment. I propose an amendment to raise it to $15.
Okay.
What's the difference?
I feel like an auctioneer now. Hearing 15. Call for the question on 15. All those in favor of 15, raise your hand. Okay, any opposed? Senator James. Okay. Further discussion on the bill? Further amendments? All right. Seeing none. Lavelle, welcome to 2000. Senator James. I was going to have her call the roll, but go ahead, Senator James.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Who pays for this? This is the person that's getting the fingerprints.
Senator Schuler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, it is. So if it's a teacher that goes in, or a banker, or a fireman, or, someone that's new to the state that wants to work with the big brothers and big sisters, wants to work with youth, yes, they pay for it.
But Senator Schuler, doesn't sometimes the organization pay for it? I mean, just a question.
Yeah, if they want to have you work in their organization, they may pay that, particularly if you have to have an extensive criminal background check. They could pay for it, but most of the time, just your general citizens, if they're just doing just the fingerprint check, they'll pay for it themselves.
Okay. Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So for criminals, who pays for that?
Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you do a criminal background check, I believe that it's it generally falls into a different category, and it costs more, and there's a lot more added. They may look in, I think it's called WIN, a number of states just in the western area, and they have to go and check with all of these states. I'm trying to remember what they all are. Alaska, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, Oregon, Utah, Washington. They have to go to that Western Identification Network, and they actually run a criminal history then. And they actually go and they take a look and they see whether or not this person's had felonies or other issues. And so when it's a non-criminal justice applicant, a criminal justice applicant, it's kind of a whole different deal. They have to pay more. And because, again, they have to do a lot more of a background check than they would on a teacher or a youth worker or a policeman or something like that. Or not a policeman, but yeah.
Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So since this money goes into general funds, does this money in any way help pay for actual criminals' fingerprints?
Senator Schuler.
I believe that, I guess I should go back and look at the statute, but I believe all that money does go into the general fund, but then it could be parceled out for the correctional institutes that might be doing that criminal background check, or if there's an FBI situation involved or something like that, because we do give them block grants, and so they are part of the general fund. But when it's a non-criminal, then it just goes directly into the general fund. It doesn't go back to help take care of the situation with our police being called off the streets to have to come in and do a fingerprint check or something like that. So I hope that answers that.
Follow up, Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to clarify that good people are paying for bad people's mistakes and that type of thing. So I just want to clarify that.
Thank you, Senator. And I think probably in a real technical sense, local law enforcement, their state funding, I'm not sure how extensive that is. I know that there have been particular flow-through grants and things, but I think by and large, local law enforcement is funded by local taxes would be my guess. And so it sounds like they collect this money and pass it on. I think I got that right. DCI obviously would be a state funded organization. FBI would be funded by the United States. So anything else on the bill? And I'm just one more glance out at the attendees. I don't see anybody that has their hand up. So I think we're ready for a roll call. Is that right? Lavelle. Entrance stage right. Go ahead and call the roll.
Senator Baldwin.
Aye.
Senator James.
No.
Senator Pappas.
Aye.
Senator Schuler.
Aye.
And Chairman Case.
Aye. Thank you. Looks like
Your
4
speaker.
ayes. Go ahead. Announce it, Lavelle. You got to do your job.
I couldn't hear the last vote because we had a scratch in did you vote aye, Senator or Chairman Case?
I did. So.
Okay. So on Senate File 70, we have 4 ayes and 1 no, and the bill is a do pass amended.
Thank you. And Senator Schuler, we have an amendment that we will introduce the standing committee amendment and yield to you to finish it off. Is that okay? That'll be our plan.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd be happy to do it.
All right. And then the next bill, I want to make an announcement before we get too far in. We're going to be bogged down with bills coming up, and so we won't get to the last bill today. So if you want to wait around for that bill, we will take that up next week when we're in-person session. And we won't get to the Senate File 69, ad valorem tax administration. We will not take that up today. So we will take it up. Probably the earliest it come up would be Tuesday. We typically meet Tuesday or Thursday, so I'm not sure if we'll have our act together for a Tuesday meeting or not. But we will take it up next week. Okay, the next bill for our consideration, we're kind of hitting all the members of the committee here. It's Senate File 77, Legislator Salary Restrictions. And I believe that Senator James, that's your bill.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So legislator salary restriction is, so the reason for this bill is to ensure the people's money is being spent in the most responsible and efficient way possible. This will accomplish this by only allowing public employees that are legislators to collect their legislator salary while doing legislative duties. And these public employees will be afforded the same abilities as private sector by using their PTO and unpaid time off, just like private sector does. So it'll just be doing it the same way private sector does, and they'll just be receiving their legislative pay. And so currently right now, there are examples with UW and a number of the school districts and counties where they have salaries that are made up, makes up the difference of their legislative pay, or they receive their full pay. And that's according to policies within the school districts or counties and UW as well. So that's what this bill will do, is it'll make sure that while they're doing legislative duties, that they only receive legislative pay. And that's pretty much the entire bill. I stand for any questions.
Okay, Senator James. Any questions for Senator James? Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I looked at this bill, of course, right away, I started thinking about a lot of the folks, not just in the public employees and state employees, county and city and so on, but I started thinking about even companies that get subsidies from our government. That includes a lot of people. And just as an example, we had a legislator from my district that was served in the House for many years. And I think, or at least I'm fairly certain, that most of those districts that have teachers, at least, that become legislators, usually work some kind of a deal out with their district, and their salary goes to pay their substitutes. I can't say that's for sure with all of them, but I do know for some of the ones that I'm aware of, that's kind of what they do. If you were a new teacher, not making an awful lot, and you didn't get paid other than what you get paid to be a legislator, you would probably be going in the hole in some districts. Some districts pay a little bit more for substitutes than others. So really, it would behoove them not to run, not to be a member of the legislature, because they would really go in the hole by the time, as we well know, the per diem just barely pays what you have to put forth when you're at the legislature. So, but I started thinking about that, and I thought, I understand the intent of the bill, but I think if we start, picking winners and losers here, we're going to have fewer people that will have an interest in running for our legislature. I don't think we have tons of folks headed down that path anyway, but I don't believe in the double dipping. I think that if a district is not using their salary to at least pay for a sub or whatever, then I think that's an issue that probably the legislator in the district would have to work that out, or even UW, and I'm not sure how they do theirs. But, you know, if we wanted to get real picky about private sector even, you know, there's so many companies that we subsidize. I mean, you know, we subsidize telecommunications, we subsidize oil and gas, we subsidize ranchers, if you really want to get, you know, picky about it. And in a lot of ways, because of, you know, if they have a drought or they have various losses, you know, the federal government subsidizes a lot of folks. And so that's kind of the problem I think I have with this. I mean, I certainly understand the intent. I just don't think anybody's getting rich on the salaries that our legislators are making, along with doing their jobs. And so that's my concern. And I don't know if you could address that or not, Senator.
Senator James?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I can. As far as how that goes, if they're paying for a service to pay for substitute teachers, that is something that they would need to work out. And if that's something the school district is making them do, then that could definitely be not count as their pay. So that could definitely be worked out. There's always room for negotiations and amendments. So that could always be brought, fixed. As far as the subsidies goes, federal money, that doesn't apply to us. So, and I'm all for not subsidizing private sector. Let's get rid of that. I've been a big opponent of subsidizing private sector. Taxpayers should not be subsidizing private sector. So by all means, let's do that. So we're on the same team on that one. And let's keep, as far as picking winners and losers, I can think of quite a few government agencies that do that here. So let's get rid of those too. But as far as picking winners and losers, in that aspect, that's not what this is doing. This is keeping everyone equal in the same pay. Right now, what this does is this keeps the private sector people out, and this makes it easier for public sector in, because they get this pay plus their public pay. So makes it far easier for them to do it, when private sector has to use all their vacation or take unpaid time, while public sector is able to get this pay plus their pay. So that's making them winners, versus private sector makes it harder for them to come in. So you see what I'm saying there? So if it makes it easier and keeps us all equal, who's the winner and who's the loser there? So that's what this does right here. It keeps everyone on the same page and keeps everyone on the same line. So that's all I'm trying to do here.
Okay, further questions? Senator Baldwin?
Mr. Chairman, excuse me. I just have a question, because the thought keeps running through my mind, and I understand the intent of the bill very well. My question is, there's a whole lot of salaried employees out there, and that would include private and public, where they're getting a salary, a monthly salary, a yearly salary, however that works out. And the hours per se don't work out hour per hour. And I would use myself as an example. I worked for a public hospital. I don't anymore. But I went in the evenings, I refilled prescriptions, for example. Some weekends I went and worked, but it wasn't hour per hour of what I was missing with the legislature. I guess my question is there a way to amend to fit those kinds of situations? Or do we just say, no, you're going to have to be docked for what you're in the legislature. We're going to have to take that out of your salary and work ways to take it out. I guess that's a question in my mind. I would like that addressed.
Senator James?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thing is when you're here doing the people's work, that's what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be doing the people's work. That's what you're hired to do. What you do on your own time, that's up to you. You're not here to be paid for doing whatever you do on your own time. You're here, you're supposed to be working for the people. So that's what you're going to be getting paid for. You're getting paid by the taxpayer dollars. That's all you're getting paid for. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay. We okay? Anybody else? So Senator James, you had in your follow-up, I think it was to Senator Schuler's question, you were talking about private sector folks that are paid by the private sector and are in the legislature. And I'm private sector. I'm president of a corporation, and I draw a salary when I'm in the legislature from that corporation. Never thought of it quite this way before, but I still work for that corporation and I make all the decisions. My son will tell you I don't work enough, but he carries the big load when I'm gone. He carries the big load all the time, really, actually, truth be known. But I'm still drawing a salary and I'm in the legislature. Your bill seems to only apply to public employees, but I'm going to draw a monthly salary this month. How do we have a distinction between one and the other, or do we?
Mr. Chairman, that's not the people's money.
Mm-hmm.
I'm only worried about the people's money because that's all we're in charge of. People's money is what we're in charge of. We're in charge of the purse strings. That's what we're supposed to be spending responsibly. So that's what I'm concerned about. What private sector does with their money in this particular circumstance on this bill, that's up to them. But
Right. Thank you, Senator.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
Okay. No, that's pretty much all I have to say on that one.
Okay. Are there other questions for Senator James? And I want to give a heads up, Senator James. I've heard from Senator Hicks, the Senate Vice President. He's apparently, he's on appropriations. He's working on an amendment, and they're in meeting right now. I don't know if you've heard from them, and I don't mean to, but he's asking if he have the chance to propose his amendment. So what I was thinking is that what we can do is we could see if there's any public testimony, any further questions from the committee. And if it's okay with you, I'll leave it up to you. We set your bill aside just during the course of today. We take up other bills and see when Senator Hicks can join us.
Sure.
It seems like a collegial thing to do. And if it's okay with you, kind of an absent objection thing.
Sure.
Okay. I'm looking at the committee. Any other questions from the committee? And Danielle, help me. I'm not seeing any hands raised. Oh, I am seeing one. Ms. Simmons, let's let her in. And if anybody else wants to be let in, why don't you raise your hands now? We'll get you in so we don't have the delay. I'm only seeing Ms. Simmons. Ms. Simmons, welcome. We'll let you you're probably in that transition time. It's like being teleported down to Planet X from the Starship Enterprise, and you don't hear that thing in the middle. Are you with us? You're muted, Ms. Simmons. See, I can just hear.
Okay. Am I unmuted?
We hear you loud and clear. Please go ahead. We don't see you, but that's up to you.
Okay. Let me try that as well. I'm following two committees, so this is not easy. My name is Gail Simmons, Mr. Chairman, and I consider myself a civics geek. And I just have a brief comment on this. Well, 2 points that I'd like to make. First of all, this really feels like the corollary to George Orwell's Animal Farm, where instead of some animals being more equal than others, we have some animals being less equal than others. Anything, in my mind, that decreases the ability of individuals to participate in our processes is suspect from the get-go. The second thing is, I don't think the legislature needs to determine who can and cannot, from a financial perspective, participate in our processes. If somebody is in House District, 20, and regardless of whether they're paid in the private sector, public sector, retired, it should be up to the voters in that particular district whether or not they consider this idea of double dipping as an issue or not. And so to have this be a draconian, no, we're going to have public employees have less opportunity. Let's leave that up to the voters. So I'm on and against this. I think that the minimal impact of double dipping is far exceeded by the harm that is done to our processes when we effectively exclude individuals from participating. And so I urge to take a look at this in a different way, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Simmons. Questions for Ms. Simmons? Any questions by the committee? Ms. Simmons, I'll just wade in. What about the appearance that someone that's drawing a public salary or compensation, it doesn't have to be a salary, it could be, and at the same time serving the legislature also is, that there's a bit of a conflict there. And
So
that they maybe have a kind of an obligation to their employer and an obligation to their citizens. And how do we, tell me about that? What are your thoughts about that?
Okay, so first of all, when we fund a department or an organization, we fund them to produce or to provide support, to provide services, to provide product, and that requirement is really overall. So if an individual is being paid by a school district, for example, a teacher who is also serving in the school district, there's the teaching is still occurring. If this is a particular problem, then the answer should be that they don't get their legislative, not that they lose their employment. So, it may be double dipping. It could have some other problems, and I understand those. I just think that the harm that is done by making it fiscally impossible for public employees to serve in our legislature or any other elected position far exceeds any other harm.
Thank you, Ms. Simmons. Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Simmons, so I'm just curious how this would make it fiscally impossible for a public employee to serve in the legislature when it just makes it equal for a private sector and a public sector employee to serve in on the same plane. When they're both getting paid the same in the legislature. So when it makes it equal in all areas, that's all this does. It doesn't prohibit anyone. It doesn't say anyone can't serve. It just puts everyone on an equal pay scale during this time. And so I'm not understanding where you're coming from, where it's saying that someone can't serve. If you could elaborate on that for me, please.
Thank you, Senator James. Ms. Simmons.
Mr. Chairman, Senator James. So we're not guaranteed equity. We are guaranteed equal opportunity. So if I take that example and say, well, everybody has to be the same. If I was in the legislature, I'm on a fixed income, I'm retired. Somebody else may be an attorney, and I can guarantee you that the worst attorney is making more than I do on a fixed salary. So there's no equity in terms of the decisions that we've made in our life as to what professions we're in or the employment that we have. And I would say that it is not the legislature's responsibility to try to equal that. In fact, I think it goes well beyond what the legislature does. So I'm more concerned about the fact that, I'm sorry, the question was, how does it prevent them? So I am a public attorney a district attorney, if you will, and I have 2 kids and a wife that works at home, or a husband that works at home, sorry. And so basically, I have a mortgage that is based on the house that I bought probably before I ever decided to run. And so now, if we pass this law, effectively, you're saying that as long as I am in session, that I am not going to get the revenue stream that qualified me for the mortgage. So my ability to say, yes, I'm going to take the risk of running for office. On top of that, I'm running the risk of fiscal responsibility. When we have a citizen legislature, it needs to be in addition to what we do in our real life, not instead of. And so the whole premise of this is that for one class of individuals, and because that's exactly what we're doing, we're creating 2 separate classes of individuals when it comes to running for office. One class that is unaffected by serving, from when they were, before they were elected to when they are, and one class that isn't. And I think that class split out again is a bigger problem. And it is I don't know that there's a legal definition of chilling effect, but it essentially says, you know what, you're going to have more of a financial hardship than somebody who is not in the public sector. So I'm going to turn that on its head.
Sure. Follow up, Senator James. Thank you, Ms. Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So being in the private sector, whenever I come down to session, I budget before I come down to session. Because fortunately it happens same time every year. So I'm able to budget ahead of time. I save a little bit extra because it happens same time every year. So I put that money aside, make sure that money is there. So when my mortgage comes out, the money's there. I'm able to put a little extra aside so my utilities are paid for. You know, if someone doesn't know how to budget, do we really want them handling the people's money? I know I don't. So that's what happens when the same thing happens every year. You know, we want people that are fiscally responsible handling people's money. And as far as the legislature being in charge of this type of thing, that is our responsibility. We handle the purse strings. That is exactly our responsibility. So yes, we do handle that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator James. Further discussion from the committee? Further discussion? Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question for Ms. Simmons, just to follow along. So in the situation that I brought up about, for instance, a teacher, since obviously this is geared towards them as well as other public sectors. If their district is already taking their salary to pay their subs, I just wonder what you think about how tough it would be and how complex it would be to know what every district does in terms of trying to allocate something like this bill in an equal manner if something like this did go through, because maybe some districts take more than what their sub gets. I don't know. Every district is going to be different. I don't know how they would do it with state employees in terms of, you know, like a county attorney, a district, as you mentioned before. But how do you suppose that we would ever maneuver this situation the way, if you could just elaborate on that? Thank you.
Ms. Simmons. Thank you, Senator Schuler.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Schuler, I think that it would be near impossible. The kind of the home rule idea, which isn't in the Constitution, but is pretty well embedded, it indicates that each school district is responsible for providing their the education in their area. And I think that The same is true for any district. So not just district, but department. So rather than having the legislature say, this is what you have to do, they own, school district owns the education that is provided. And they've got a responsibility to their citizens as well as to their students and their other employees to ensure that there is some kind of equitable capability in or application of rules. I can't see any upside on this. I reject the idea that because somebody is in a better position than I am, they need to be brought down to my level. I would rather they be at whatever level they're at. And I'm going to try to raise myself to their level. And so I believe it's up to the department that employs that individual. I would expect the individual would check with their department first, that the school district, before they go to the voters, and the voters are going to know what their occupation is. So if the Sheridan County House District 29 wants to elect a school teacher, what right or what on what basis would the legislature made up of 89 other individuals say that that's not right? Leave it to the voters.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Simmons. I am not seeing any hands up in the waiting room. And I'm wondering, I do know that Senator Hicks is going to join us. And absent objection, I'd just like to slide this bill aside. We're still going to take it up today. And we will readmit people that want to discuss whatever the conversation goes from Senator Hicks. So we'll just work it that way, if that's all right. Okay. Great. Thank you very much. So the next one is Senate File 85, Property Tax Reporting and Exemption. I'm trying to remember who's going to help us with this one. If you'll give me a moment, I'm going to get a better look at it, and it might jog a memory. Maybe not.
Senator Ellis, I believe, has this one, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, it is Senator Ellis. Oh, I remember this bill. Now it all comes back, of course. Senator Ellis, are you trying to get in? You are in. Hooray.
Here.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I appreciate that. I remember this bill, remember this issue, but this is a little different than what we've tried in the past. And so what Senate File 85 attempts to do has been 3 years in the making, I'd say maybe more. But just to refresh your memory, you'll recall that our current statutes require that as a business owner, any equipment that you have that you use to operate your business is assessed each year based on an evaluation calculation that's done by your county assessor. And in 2017, our Government Efficiency Commission hired Alvarez and Marsal to develop a commission or an efficiency report containing recommendations. And one of their recommendations was how to do a better job of collecting these personal property reporting declarations. And so at the time, we started looking at our penalties. And you'll recall, senators, that in current law, if you don't report your declaration, you could be subject to a court appearance. You could be convicted of a misdemeanor and face a pretty hefty fine. Right now, it's up to $500 and potentially imprisonment up to 90 days or both. And so the recommendation and the discussion we had back then in the Revenue Committee was, well, this isn't being utilized because it's such an excessive punishment for someone who fails to report. So what's a different way of tackling it? And so the language that you'll see has been discussed by this committee and other bills, but it would require more or less a fee of $10 per day, not to exceed $500 that could be imposed on the taxpayer, and that fee can be waived for good cause, because we recognize in some instances these tax bills can be very low, and so we don't want a heavy hammer of assessing a $500 fine if someone's only, $5 delinquent in their tax. So that's the first part of the bill. But the second part kind of gets to something we struggled with, which is how to do a better job of enforcement. And sent you all an email earlier this week, but there are about 38,000 tax accounts across the state of Wyoming. And if you really start diving into how those break out, the bulk of those, or there's a very large number of those, actually generate very little revenue versus very few accounts generating the lion's share of the revenue. So in the email that I've sent you, you'll see some of that breakout. There are 7,000 tax accounts where the taxpayers pay less than $15 per year. And so that $15 tax bill roughly translates to a $2,400 value of business equipment. And if you drill down even further, of that 7,000, about 3,000 of those generate less than $5 a year. And about 550 of those accounts statewide generate less than $1. So that means we have county assessors doing the math, asking for declarations, asking the taxpayer to provide these forms, doing the calculation, only to send out bills in some cases as low as 6 cents. We have 500 accounts that do that across the state, 550 that send out tax bills for less than $1. And so when you think about this, the time that it costs the taxpayer to submit their declaration, the time that it takes to put a stamp on it, to do all that paperwork, I'd argue that we're not being efficient with our resources, and we should be focusing on those counts that actually generate some tax dollars. So what this bill seeks to do is exempt those very small taxpayers who are paying less than $15 per year from having to report at all. And so I have worked with the county assessors, and to finish that last thought though, of those 38,000 accounts, 6,000 of them generate 129 million, which is about 96% of the total revenue. So there definitely are taxpayers who are very much fewer that are footing the entire bill for the state of Wyoming. In working with the assessors, we've had a lot of concern about how to do this uniformly and fairly. And so the bill that we discussed last year would have actually provided a tax credit to all taxpayers. And we tried to make it work. It was a really difficult concept to administer because there were concerns about taxpayers who have property in multiple counties. You know, how would you divide out or, ration those tax credits? And then at the end of the day, it didn't seem to make a lot of sense to try and offer a $20 tax credit to a taxpayer who's paying thousands of dollars. It really is insignificant at this point. So this bill takes a different approach. It creates a de minimis exemption that just says if you're a small taxpayer, you're not worth our time to try and collect and assess, and we're just going to leave you alone. So as the email will show you, right now in Wyoming, like other states, we have a uniformity of assessment requirement. A lot of states have this, and this says we're going to treat taxpayers fairly and similarly. And that was another concern we heard last year, that this would somehow create some kind of inequity. And in doing a lot more research this past year, I can assure you that my concerns have been completely addressed on this point. Case law in Wyoming is clear that the assessment rate has to be the same. But the collection is a whole nother matter. Certainly we have instances where taxpayers default, where we have to write off certain tax measures. It's not a perfect system. But the thing that we have to focus on is making sure that we're assessing at the same rate. And so this bill doesn't give smaller taxpayers a different rate. We're still assessing the equipment using the same tools and methodology across the board. We're just saying that it's not worth our time to collect on some of these very small tax bills. And that's a reasonable and rational reason that if it were challenged in a court, I think a court would very much recognize. And so in the email I've sent you, the Tax Foundation has put together a really helpful map that shows how many states actually offer a de minimis exemption for tax exemptions. You'll see that Wyoming is one of the few Western states. Most of our neighboring states, except for South Dakota, offer this exemption. And so the concerns about it somehow not being fair or equal, I think, should be laid to rest. We have a rational reason for saying it's not worth our time to try and collect on these accounts. In doing more research again across the board, in 2019, the Department of Revenue presented to the Revenue Committee. And at the time, they said that there had been a decrease in the number of assessors working in our county offices. In 2015, there were 180 full-time equivalents across Wyoming. And by 2019, the workforce had decreased to 160, or a reduction of 60 assessors, which represents an 11% decrease. And so in visiting with the assessors, I'll be very blunt, not all of them like this bill. I think a lot of them want to continue to do business as is, but they can provide some testimony in visiting with them. They literally look at your chambers of commerces to see who new members are. They look at magnets on the side of cars to see if new businesses are popping up. They look at Facebook pages to see if businesses are announcing their presence. And all the while they are scouring these businesses, trying to determine whether or not it's worth their time to assess. they want to do it uniformly. And so they do spend time talking to taxpayers who end up paying $3, $5 tax bills. And so, Mr. Chairman, that's the reason for this bill is we want to give the assessors a break and really allow them to use their resources where they matter. And I think it is on those large companies that have identifiable large pieces of equipment, certainly oil field equipment, large tractors used in farming and ranching that have depreciable value. But when you see your assessors trying to consider the depreciated value of a hammer that's 20 years old, it just doesn't seem like it's worth our time to continue to pursue those pennies. And so in your binder in your email, I sent an attachment that was prepared by Park County Assessor Meyer, and it's called Binder PP Exemption. And he provided a breakout of how this would impact each county. And in Laramie County alone, my county that I represent, it would remove 1,000 taxpayers off our rolls. And some of those taxpayers, I think the least amount I saw was that we are sending out tax bills that are for 7 cents. And so that's the bill, Mr. Chairman. I've done a lot more research on it. This is a clean, straightforward bill. But I would ask in visiting with the assessors just to have that uniformity consistent throughout our statute, that if the committee decides to work this bill, that maybe we address one definition, and that is sorry, I'm looking at the wrong sheet of paper. On page 2, line 19, I used the word actual value because I wanted this bill to be friendly to a taxpayer so that they could look at their business property and do a quick math and say, I fall below this threshold, I don't need to report. But to be consistent, it probably makes some sense to insert the term fair market value. That way we're just, again, treating all taxpayers the same. So that's my recommendation if the committee decides to work this bill, Mr. Chairman. Happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Ellis. It's good to see you and welcome back to the committee, and I look forward to visiting. Other members of the committee, any questions for Senator Ellis? Anything for Senator Ellis?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Senator Ellis.
One follow-up, I did want to talk about the fiscal note. Last year we were trying to do an exemption that would apply to all taxpayers, and the number got a little big. This one's very narrow. The total impact the state would be, according to the fiscal note, it's a little different than what our calculations provided, but we're looking at about a reduction of $50,000. And I think when you weigh the time and effort that our assessors are out there trying to count these pennies, I think that there's tremendously a lot of value in this bill. For my county, which is a large county, removing those 1,000 accounts would only result in a hit of about $6,000. So I think that is something our assessor, I think, is comfortable with and can absorb, recognizing there would be an efficiency realized on the backside.
Okay, we're going to admit, Senator Ellis, thank you for that. I'd like to admit anybody that has their hands up. I see Ms. Huxtable. Let's get you in. And is anybody else wants to raise their hand on this bill? We could get you in too, so we don't have these delays and it flows a little better. I'm not seeing any others. Ms. Huxtable, Ms. Murdoch, we'll let you in too. But Ms. Huxtable is going to be the first up. All right. Welcome, Assessor Huxtable. How are you?
I'm great. Good afternoon, Senator Case, Chairman, and members of your committee. It's a great day, except we got snow. It was supposed to be a nice day, and we have snow here. So I guess we'll just live with it and be glad we're on Zoom instead of traveling.
I'd be glad you have snow.
Yeah, that's true. I'm not really complaining too much since I'm not traveling. But in response to Senate File 85, the assessors have looked at it and talked about it. We did meet with Senator Ellis. We did go through some of the comments. Typically, the Assessors Association, by the way, I should correct, I'm Dixie Huxtable, Converse County Assessor, representing the Assessors Association right now. We typically do not take a position on a tax policy bill, and this appears to be a tax policy bill in our opinion. The only time we really take a position is if we can't administer it, and we believe we could administer this bill. If the legislature chose to do this de minimis amount of $2,400, I think we can certainly administer it. Speaking as Converse County Assessor, I guess I would just comment that the administration of it might need some help with rules, because I still think there is some language in the statute that says they have to report. And so then would assessors be still requiring, would some assessors be requiring that report and then deciding to exempt them, or would some just presume that if somebody didn't report that they're exempt? So I think there might still be a little cleanup on the backside in the rules, but I think that could probably be worked out. The Assessors Association really takes no position on this, and we do think we could administer it.
Thank you, Ms. Huxtable. Anybody else? Senator Ellis, questions for Ms. Huxtable? Senator
Mr.
Ellis?
Chairman, Assessor Huxtable and I visited about this. There is a part in the Department of Revenue's rules which have a duty to prove that you're entitled to an exemption. But because this is a statute, that would supersede a language of a rule. So I think that that would even clear up that issue even further. I haven't been able to confirm that with the Department of Revenue, but statutes always trump rules. And so that I think would be addressed and answered
Okay.
just by that fact.
I see that Mr. Noble from the Department of Revenue is among the attendees. I don't know if he was prepared to address this or perhaps not. Mr. Noble, you have your hand up. We'll get you in too. So let's, Ms. Huxtable, any questions for Ms. Huxtable? Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm not sure if this is for Ms. Huxtable or Senator Ellis, but so is this the actual value of the property? Is this per piece of property or for all property under the business under $2,400?
Who wants to answer that? Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Combined value for per taxpayer.
Per taxpayer.
And
and
one
then-
other limitation, Mr. Chairman, is
Go ahead.
it's only limited to taxpayers that have taxable property in one county. So if you have a business that has property in multiple counties, you're not eligible for this exemption.
Senator James.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, and then also too, so if there's a property that have a lien on it, does the assessment come off the value that the bank has off of it, has on it, or does the assessor come up with their own assessed value?
Let's refer that to Ms. Huxtable.
Senator Case, Senator James, I don't know of many liens that are on personal property. I think you might have been referring to real property, and we are specifically talking business personal property. And the value would be related on what the assessor calculates. So the taxpayer would report an installed cost of the equipment, and then that installed cost is calculated by the assessor into a fair market value. Trending, depreciating, those kinds of methodologies would be applied. And then the fair market value of $2,400 or less would be the part that determines if they are exempt. And as I understand the bill, if the total came up to say $2,500, they are taxable at the full $2,500. They don't get a deduction of $2,400 and pay the net. It's if your total value is $2,400 or less, assuming we get the amendment in to be fair market value, then you would be exempt from paying any tax.
Thank you, Ms. Huxtable. Follow up, Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So isn't the fair market value, or shouldn't the value be based off of what a bank would be paying for that piece of property, since that's who would be purchasing the property from the county when that property would be, since that's who would be buying it from the county, or would the county be auctioning it off, or how would that be, how would the property be gotten rid of, basically, if the owner were to default, is my question. Does that make sense?
I think I got it, but Ms. Huxtable, you want to? So Senator James, I'm not seeing people jumping on this, but I note the value that the bank, they can repossess stuff if people don't pay, obviously. Usually the value is not necessarily what the stuff could be sold on. They hope to resell it. I assure you the bank doesn't want my couch. So I think the terms of fair market value, though, that's a litigated long-term method. And perhaps the assessors could explain that to us a little bit more about that term, Ms. Huxtable. I don't know if I helped it at all. But please go ahead. And then we've got Mr. Noble here who could also address that.
Mr. Chairman and Senator James, yes, it's fair market value. As all property, we are required to have it at fair market value. And for personal property, we start with their reported cost. But the
Just pardon me 1 second. Somebody has something ringing in the background. It's most of you are muted, so it's either got to be Senate Revenue Committee, Senator Case, or Ms. Huxtable. One of us
might have been in my office. We just shut it off. I apologize.
Okay.
It was ringing through the office door, and so I had him shut it off. I apologize.
You know, there used to be a rule that if your cell phone went off, you had to buy donuts for the whole committee. So,
Chairman, it wasn't my cell phone, but I'd be happy to help in any way I can. It was not my cell phone. It was the office phone, but we'll take care of that. Back to the fair market value. It is to be at fair market value, which may or may not be what the bank would sell it for. In theory, it would be the fair market value, but the Treasurer's Office actually handles the sales of those properties that have went delinquent for property taxes. So they would be the best one to talk to about how they would sell those, because the Assessor's Office doesn't. Typically, very few personal property counts go to some kind of a tax sale or a distraint sale, I think is what it's called for treasurers. So I don't know how that would really relate to a bank wanting to buy off on them, but if they had a lien, I would presume that the bank would want to make sure the taxes were paid.
Fair enough.
That answers the question.
I think it was a good shot. Anything else for Ms. Huxtable right now? So I see everybody's in the room. I assume you're in the room because you want to talk, and I think I'll let Ms. Murdoch in next. So let's let you go next. Is that okay?
That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, committee members. I'm Charlene Murdoch. I am testifying today on behalf of the Wyoming Business and Industry Federation. That is a group of 11 chambers of commerce from around the state. We cover all 4 corners of the state and lots of communities in between. And on this bill, I'm speaking on and for the bill. Thank you, Senator Ellis, for bringing the bill. You know, this just to us seems like a good governance bill. In business that especially when you are trying to figure out how you get the most value out of your resources, that you focus on those activities that generate the greatest result. This bill seems to do that. It allows the assessors to focus their attention where they think they can generate the most revenue for the county. I will attest to Senator Ellis's comment about assessors chasing people down and looking at Chamber of Commerce lists. I have a colleague who joined the chamber here in Cheyenne. She is a lobbyist. She works from home, and her assets include a very dated laptop and a printer. And she was called and asked about the value of those items relative to her tax bill. So our local assessor was doing their job, but spent time really on an activity that added no value to them. So again, I'd stand for comment, but hoping that you will vote yes on this bill to allow our public officials to do their job to the best of their ability.
Thank you, Ms. Murdoch. Questions for Ms. Murdoch? Any questions for Ms. Murdoch? I'm not seeing any. Thank you very much. Mr. Gagliardi, am I saying it right? I'm so sorry if I'm not, and you're muted. Still muted. There you go.
There we go. There we go. It's Gagliardi. Second G is silent, Senator Case.
Gagliardi. Thank you, Mr. Gagliardi. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Tony Gagliardi. I'm the Wyoming State Director for the National Federation of Independent Business. Have the honor of representing over 2,700 members in Wyoming. And these are small businesses, home-based businesses. And the easiest way, this issue, I have been dealing with this issue in various states for several years, and I congratulate Senator Ellis for recognizing what this issue means to the smallest of the small businesses. And I like to use the example, and for this purpose, I can see my bookcase over my shoulder on the screen here. technically I'm going to pay tax on that, under business personal property tax, from the day I bought it until I throw it out, even though it has no depreciable value as far as tax purposes. Or a dining room table, think about, you're going to pay a tax on that until your significant other decides this has absolutely no more value and we throw it out if it's used in any type of business. Many assessors will tell me that this tax costs more to administer and collect than they collect in total. And I think at $2,400 or less, this is just good public policy. It's efficient public policy. And sometimes we don't use those terms interchangeably or together. So this really is good public policy, not only for the state and counties of Wyoming, but also for the thousands of small business owners you have in the state of Wyoming. And as I said, 2,700 of those that I represent. So we thank Senator Alice for not giving up on this issue and for educating. She sent me the report, I think, that she sent to you all. And it's a phenomenal report, and I would encourage you all to read it because it really is an eye-opener. And thank you again for allowing me to join you today. I'm sorry we can't all be together in person, but it is what it is. So thank you, Senator Alice. Thank you, Senator Case, and members of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Gagliardi. Thank you very much. Questions from Mr. Gagliardi? I haven't heard anyone address the issue of what happens and how the exemption is $2,400, and companies buy equipment, their amount of equipment might grow above $2,400. How does they go back into the system? Is there an easy way for that to happen? And let's hear from that. And then we're also going to hear from the Department of Revenue. But Senator Ellis, do you want to address that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you raise a really good point. And so one aspect of this bill that I didn't mention was I kept the number purposefully low because I do want to find that efficiency, not just have this be a free-for-all. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, if a taxpayer ends up acquiring $2,401, it is that question of, well, is it still worth our time? And I would argue no. I mean, I picked a low number. If you went to Colorado, they have a reporting system that's more like along the lines of 7,000, but they have a built-in inflation count or schedule, so it grows every year. And in Colorado, because it is higher, and I think the higher you put that level, then maybe the more reporting is required. But that's been the problem with this tax is the fair administration of it is how do you start educating 38,000 different taxpayers on what they should and shouldn't be reporting? And some of it gets really sticky, and it's going to get stickier as you have more and more people working from home, working from the kitchen table. Should they be assessed a full tax depreciated value of their dining room table when the vast majority of the time they eat on that table as well? And what if they don't eat at that table and they sit on their couch and it's on their lap? Are you going to charge the couch that they normally take a nap on? And so it's a very difficult tax, I think, when you really conceptualize what we're trying to get after. And so I think going forward, a big discussion that I brought forward with the assessors is that education piece. And I think that the Revenue Committee and perhaps the Joint Corporations Committee going into the future can look at ways of trying to bring some of these reporting moments together. So if a business is redoing their LLC paperwork, is there a way or an opportunity that they can either attest on that paperwork that says I still am below the $2,400 fair market value for my business equipment? That's a way to check it easily. But it's how are we, I think that there's more work that we can do to educate the public what happens when you get above that threshold. But for now, it's just, we can worry about all those things, we can write rules about how much are you sitting at your couch, at your kitchen table, but is it worth our time? And this bill's trying to say, no, there's a level where it's not worth our time to make those calculations or write those rules. I hope I answered your question, Senator Case.
Well,
but
thank you, Senator Ellis. I think it was a good effort. I still wonder about that. And I'm wondering if it would be easier to have the taxpayers attest that it's less than 2,400 and mail something back to the assessor so they know, so that, you know, and if they cheat on the attestment, then that's one thing, but it also would send us trying to track them down, because I'm not sure where I see that there's ongoing contact at all. So, and I don't redo my corporate paperwork very often, so I don't think that's a very good way to catch changes. So you better help me with this.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. I think, if I may, with your whatever annual filing, we talked about this with, I talked about this with the assessors. We don't have a really kind of one-stop shop place for taxpayers when they say, you know, you're going to do business in Wyoming and here are all the things you should consider and all the rules you should know. And so unfortunately, this tax for a lot of small taxpayers just slips through the cracks. They don't realize that they're supposed to do it. And so, you know, we can have, again, a really aggressive, you started a small business and we're going to educate you, but all that takes time and money and effort. And at some point, for some taxpayers, it's just not worth the time and money and effort to invest in that. So I think if you wanted to do a better job, I mean, but keep in mind, 96% of the revenue generated from this tax comes from 6,000 taxpayers, 96%. And those, I'd argue, are large corporations that have hired professionals that know exactly how they do their taxing. They have, you know, large equipment. They can argue about the valuation, whether it was done right or wrong. But it's that remaining 4%. What are we doing with that? So this bill is just trying to take a slice off of it of less than 0.5%, I think, of revenue foregone to try and look for that efficiency. And so I appreciate your need or desire for this to be fair, but we're just spending good money after bad, chasing after 6-cent tax bills. And I think that going forward, again, if this bill were to pass, it warrants additional discussion. If you want to raise the level and then have that continued nexus of reporting, fine. But for right now, it just doesn't seem sense if you have very little business property to even have to report it all, in my view.
Thank you, Senator Ellis. Assessor Huxtable, I saw that your screen lit up. So do you want to address that issue? Or
Chairman Case, that was a lot of discussion that we had, and that's where I was talking about the administration of this bill might get non-uniform amongst counties, because some may keep them in the system and require them to send back an affidavit that says nothing's changed. There's nothing in the law that precludes that. And so there is language that says all taxable property shall be reported by a certain date. So then is the presumption that if you didn't report it, it's not taxable? Or do I need to go follow up with a report? You know, the conversation about the file cabinet. The one file cabinet in one office is one thing, but when you have an office full, a building full of offices that have 5 of those and 5 desks, you might have something that's over that 2,400 limit. And the concern for us with the uniformity was one person's file cabinet is taxable, the other one was not. And how do we make sure? And some of the discussion was to have that affidavit where the taxpayer signs off on an annual basis that says, I'm not over the $2,400 limit. You know, the veterans exemption is an example of that, where we send that out. They can call us every year and say, I still want to use it. Boom, we put it in the system and they get it. Something as similar as that for this program could be viable. It could be an option that could be worked out. We came to the consensus that we could administer this the way it is. It may not be as uniform as we think it should be. And you're right, some people might just be ignored from forever, and some might be getting a letter every so often. So those are all things to work out, but we can administer it as it's written. And there's a variety of opinion as to whether it's good or bad, but we can administer it, and it's tax policy, so we'll do what y'all tell us to do.
interesting answers. But I appreciate it. How, if we wanted it to be a uniform affidavit across the state, would that be something to put in law? Could that be something that comes about through Department of Revenue rules? How does that happen? And I'm in the room. I've just got to let the cat in because he's making a whale of a racket. And I'm surprised you guys can't hear him. He's quite persistent.
So
go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'll take a stab at that. We did discuss that with Senator Ellis about the opportunity of put something in statutes that said subsequent years, there, beautiful cat, subsequent years filing could be handled as described in rules. Something like that could be in statute that would put the onus back on the Department of Revenue to promulgate rules that would handle any subsequent filings. We're open to any or all of those suggestions, and that would maybe give you some consistency across county lines. If that became an issue, it might not. I just don't know.
Okay, thank you. Anything else for Ms. Huxtable? Senator Ellis. Now I got to shut the door because the music's coming in. I'm sorry. I'm just a mess today.
Mr. Chairman, we did discuss that, and I pushed on it again because, again, recall that the whole discussion around this tax started in 2017 about how we're treating taxpayers fairly. And so when we're talking about these low-level taxpayers, you have a class of taxpayers that just don't know. And even if you were to chase them down and say, hey, you're supposed to be reporting, it's not going to make a difference to our tax rolls. It really isn't. And so there is that inequity already. And so providing an affidavit to me is still treating, the responsible people that were in the know, every year they've got to send the stamp. Someone's got to keep track of it. A piece of paper has to go somewhere. I mean, you start losing some of the beauty and the elegance of the efficiency, and you're still treating taxpayers differently. And you're not getting after the taxpayers who don't know that they're supposed to file an annual affidavit for a tax that they don't have to pay. I mean, the goal of this is to let go of things that aren't worth considering. That's what de minimis means. And so when we are talking about another affidavit, where do those papers go? How long are we going to store them? Who's going to look at them? Who's going to keep track? What happens if someone didn't do an affidavit? And just all of it, it loses the intent of keeping it de minimis, not worth our time to look at.
I admire your persistence, Senator Ellis. I have questions, and I guess I get to ask them, but I fail to understand how it's equal across the state if some assessors are going to make people sign an affidavit every year and some of them don't. Seems like we could decide one way or the other how we want that to be addressed. Anything else on this issue? I was going to go on to the Department of Revenue. We kind of drug him in here. I don't think he wanted to be here. I drug him in when we were talking about fair market value, but I'm wondering if Mr. Noble might want to address some of the other things that have come up. Hi, Mr. Noble. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I'm Dan Noble, Director of the Department of Revenue. I think probably only two issues that I'll address. One of them is the way that subsection B on page 2 reads. You only have to file a report if you have taxable property. Now, if you're under the de minimis of 2,400 or less, you don't have taxable property, so you're fine. You got to recognize that that's kind of a declaration that has to be made every year. If you exceed that $2,400 in any given year, now all of it's taxable, and you do have to report. And I think that's one of those things that, while it is what you're doing is you're creating a self-reporting system here, as it relates to your de minimis discussion with this. It is something where a report does not need to be filed every year because it basically says so in the statutes, and that Senator Ellis is correct. The statute's going to trump our rules every time. So by the very fact that it says it does not need to be filed unless you have taxable property in excess of those amounts, you would not be required to file. The concern obviously is, how do you know when a person has exceeded that as an assessor? That's something that it doesn't mean that you're still not chasing some of those issues. The real issue is how many of those taxpayers out there do you have, and whether or not there's actually $2,400 or in excess or more than $2,400 out there. I'm not sure how to address that. Obviously, it's something that there may be some people that will have in excess of that, and is it even worth chasing another $5 worth of taxable value when you know that they may be over that $2,400? I don't know. That's something that the assessors are going to have to come to grips with, and it's quite frankly, I don't envy them. I have the same issue in sales tax. We have 11,000 vendors that are annual filers, meaning that they they file less than $600 worth of tax in a year, and some of them significantly less than $600 in tax. So same issue, different requirements, but it is kind of the same issue. And with that, I'll stand for any questions anybody may have.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Noble. Questions for Mr. Noble? So if I understood Mr. Noble's testimony, it's like the assessor's got to figure this out. And I think the assessors, Ms. Huxtable, did I hear you say that we need to decide one way or the other? What happens after this when this bill's passed?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not 100% sure. Based on what Mr. Noble just said, it sounds like they don't have to report because they consider it exempt.
Mm-hmm.
So unless we believe, the assessor believes that they have property in excess of 2,400, we would take them off of our list. And then the question becomes, at what point do you decide who gets a notice and who doesn't? And that is some of the concerns that the assessors had, was being the one that chooses, I'm going to decide which one gets a letter and which one doesn't. And so I can't tell you that all 23 counties are going to do the same thing. I would hazard a guess there's going to be everybody take a look at it. They're going to make them file the first time. I think that's kind of a uniform agreement that everybody's going to need to file the first year. And then after that, each county will make the decision based on what they know in their county, whether they're going to send that rendition out ever again. And I don't know anything more than that at this point.
Thank you, Ms. Huxtable. If I can kind of play back what I'm hearing and what I'm thinking, is that it sounds like they don't have to report. So that kind of means that a whole lot of people won't be reporting, which is a good thing. That accomplishes Senator Ellis's mission, I think. But then we lose the ability to transition forward. It becomes a little bit more difficult. If businesses were to grow, or you accumulate more stuff, maybe you should be getting rid of stuff. But in my business, we accumulate stuff. So we grow past the 2,400 or farther. Then we need to be on the tax rolls, but now we've lost the connection with the tax rolls. So how does that get rectified without the assessor being kind of the hard and heavy nosy person that maybe is driving by and taking pictures or what have you? I'm just wondering if it wouldn't be easier and simpler to tell people, hey, you know what? You owe property taxes, but if they're less than you have less than $2,400 of business personal property, you don't have to pay. Just sign this piece of paper and send it back to us. That keeps them on the tax rolls. They don't have to pay the taxes. They don't have to do the inventory. And it's just very simple going forward. And every year they get that little reminder that, well, we did go up this year, so we're going to do it. Wouldn't that be easier all the way around? I'll start with Senator Ellis, and we'll go to Ms. Huxtable and then Mr. Noble.
Mr. Chairman, I think that there are a couple ways of tackling this. Like, other states clearly have figured this out. Other states have. I think the higher you get in the level that you're trying to exempt, the more maybe work it's worth to require that annual reporting or check-in. But I deliberately kept this low so that we won't be worried about it, so that it's a less of a hit to our county coffers, so that it does wipe out a significant number of tax accounts. And I think that the assessors are always going to do what they do. They're always going to be looking on social media, checking chamber lists. But I think they've already kind of got a sense of what, a new business might be. A new, large restaurant coming in is going to be different than, someone who joins the chamber and just has a home-based consulting company. I think that that's something they already kind of have in their brain that's always working already. Can we just let some of that go? Can you, look more at the margins? And nothing in this bill precludes any of our assessors from looking at a business and walking into an establishment and saying, wait a minute, you're not on my list. I think you may have $2,401. Looking at my best available information, here's why I think that, and assessing an amount to that taxpayer. And from there, then they can duke it out. But it's just reducing the number in a significant way by taking out 7,000 of those accounts. And so, really, I want to push on it, because even asking somebody to send in an affidavit with a 50-cent stamp and having them spend time with, another 25-cent postcard, for a 6-cent tax bill just doesn't seem to make sense. And so it's like, well, we could start trying to carve it up even more. You know, how do we treat our taxpayers that generate less than $1, less than $5? This was trying to keep it really simple, very low. So that if a taxpayer does inch up to 2,401, it is that question, is it worth our time? Probably not. But I still think that the assessors retain a lot of their ability to ask questions of taxpayers who they think are above that threshold level. And I'd argue this actually provides more tax parity, because we heard during those years of the interim, the biggest challenge in enforcing this fairly is the people who don't know. And so we are requiring small taxpayers that don't have a lot of expensive equipment to file and report and pay a very small amount, but we don't require it of others who just don't know. And so that is the balancing question. Do we spend a lot of time and effort to try and educate all those other small taxpayers at our expense for revenue that's not going to do anything for us? Or do we just kind of start treating all of those small taxpayers the same, which is what this bill intends to do? So it's a difference in philosophy. And I know that, you know, some people want to calculate the depreciated value of a stapler. I don't think it's worth our time. And that's why I kept it low. But I do think going forward, if we wanted to do a better job of education using tools already, renewals of licenses, renewals of LLC filings, those kind of things, incorporate that seems to be a good, efficient idea, but one that I wasn't prepared to bring this cycle. So I think this will be really helpful for a lot of small taxpayers. I think it'll be helpful for freeing up assessors' time. And just appreciate you taking up the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Let's go to Huxtable and then Noble. And Danielle, would you let Mr. Meyer in?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis is absolutely correct. This is a small amount, and just bear in mind, this is a self-reporting state. So we would, just as we do currently, we count on the taxpayers to report. And then we spend our time going out to look for the ones that might not report. And the caveat to this point has been that we're treating them all the same. Doesn't matter whether you're a big boy or a little boy, we're treating you all the same and you're all paying your fair share. This bill changes that, in that we're saying that if you're a little guy, we're not going to spend our time searching you out. And we're going to rely on the fact that in the future, you will tell us when you buy something that puts you over the limit, or we discover it some other way. So it's a self-reporting state. It's a self-reporting system. This is a de minimis amount. It absolutely is. I don't think it's going to help the reporting. I don't think we're going to get any more reporting than we were before. The people that don't tell us now are not going to tell us in the future. But what I can say is that up to this point, I as the county assessor have strived to go find everybody that has taxable business, personal property, and put them on the tax roll at whatever that amount is. Everybody got treated the same. That will not be as we go forward. I'll be treating them a little bit differently based on the law. And that's okay, just so everybody knows that up front. And we can keep them inactive in our system. If we notice as we do a field check that they've added some piece of equipment, we can send them another rendition, presuming that they are still the same owners, same address, that kind of stuff. We have the possibility of a disconnect, but we would probably keep them in our system for a certain amount of time. So we're back to that self-reporting thing, and where we are is where we will be based on that. Thank you.
Ms. Huxtable. Mr. Noble.
Mr. Chairman, I think from our perspective, it really takes it and makes it a self-reporting system as it relates to property tax. And that's perfectly fine. We deal with it in other areas of taxation as well. It is a de minimis amount. And when you consider the fact that the assessor has to not only determine that the person needs to be on the tax rolls, they also have to make sure that they get any documents they send out to them addressed properly. They're spending money getting the stamps together. So there's probably quite a bit of dollars that could be more effectively used in other areas. I'm not denying that. I think the onus becomes on the assessor to monitor that. They do today, but the fact is it'll change a little, because quite frankly, you're going to have to figure out who to send out inquiries to, assuming that they have over $2,400 worth of taxable value. That's not an awful lot of taxable, not taxable value, but actual value, market value. That's a computer and some office furniture, and you pretty well got $2,400 right then and there. So It's not a very high threshold and will not exclude a ton of people, but it will exclude some, that's for sure.
Thank you, Mr. Noble. Any questions at this point for any of the presenters? If not, I think we'll let Mr. Meyer address the committee. He had his hand up.
Thank
Assessor
you.
Meyer.
Thank you, Chairman Case. Pat Meyer, Park County Assessor. I have looked into this quite extensively last year, especially. I looked at all 7,000 accounts that were $15 and under. And I will tell you, it's really easy to look at these accounts and say, they're never going to get much more than this, no matter what they do. And then we got to get back to how we value personal property and fair market value. It's really, we trend it up with today's money and we depreciate it down. And when we're done with it, we're saying that's what you could get for it on the fair market, as fair market value. When really it's just an approved method of appraisal. It really doesn't have nothing to do with fair market value. It's not what you can get a desk for. Nobody knows. I've had the same desk for 30 years. I don't know what it's worth. If I depreciate it and depreciate it down, I don't think I can get it out of my office. So it's probably not worth anything unless somebody wanted to. So you got to keep that in mind. And all you have to do is inactivate the account. If you want to do a report and every 5 years, resend those renditions. Everybody gets a rendition to show you what you've reported. If you want to do that every 5 years, well, go ahead and do it. And maybe it'll be worth it every 5 years, but to do this year after year, and if the assessors really want to, if they don't believe what's on the rendition, well, then go audit them. But that costs money too. We've done a study on if we went and how many people it would take just to do the downtown businesses. And it just isn't worth our time or money on a self-reporting state. So I would say we're already spent a lot of time and money on this right now. And I think this will work. And with that, I'd take any questions.
Questions for Mr. Meyer? Any questions? Not seeing any. I'm not seeing any more hands up in the waiting room. So you've heard the testimony. What is your pleasure?
Move the bill.
Motion by Baldwin. Discussion. Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just after hearing all the testimony, I was thinking about making that amendment on page 2, but now I'm not sure. I guess I need some guidance on whether or not we need that or not. Maybe it needs to come from someone on the committee or Senator Ellis, either one.
Are you referring to the amendment about fair market value? I think that's probably appropriate. Would the assessors agree with that? If you don't agree with it, raise your hand and correct us. Some of them are outside of the waiting room again. You're welcome to stay with us to discuss the bill. You don't need to be outside the committee room.
My apologies, Mr. Chairman. I moved them out.
Yeah, let's leave. I'm always kind of open-minded about letting people stay in. So if we could move them back in, and Mr. Noble too. You're the first one in, Mr. Meyer, fair market value. You're muted, sir.
Mr. Chairman, could Senator Schuler repeat her question?
It has to do with the proposed amendment that Senator Ellis had talked about on page 2 of the bill to make standard of value fair market value.
Oh yeah, that's our bottom line value. That would be fair.
That's what I thought.
That would be fair.
So anybody else want to weigh in on that? Ms. Huxtable, you're kind of good with that? It'd be better. Mr. Noble, you're as black as coal, but it's okay. You're all right. So I think Senator Schuler, it looks like they definitely want fair market value. So why don't you go ahead and make that motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I would like to add an amendment on page 2, line 19, replacing the words actual value with fair market value.
Okay. Discussion. Think you heard from the assessors. All those in favor, please raise your hand. I've got everybody, so that's good. That's carried. Anything else on the bill? Anything else on the bill? Okay. Lavelle, would you like to call the roll on this bill, please?
Okay, on Senate File 85, Senator Baldwin,
Aye.
Senator James,
Aye.
Senator Pappas,
Aye.
Senator Schuler.
Aye.
And Chairman Case.
No. Okay, that bill is carried 4-1. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to back up, and I see that we've got Senator Larry Hicks in the waiting room, and we'll get rid of everybody else, and we will bring in Senator Hicks, and we will revisit the previous bill, if that's all right. Senator James, that was, of course, your bill, and that was Senate File 77. And let's give Senator Hicks a minute to get in with us. Welcome, Senator Hicks. We see you, and we discussed the bill earlier, but we've laid it back to hear from you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, and my apologies. Trying to work Medicaid reimbursements for school districts took a lot longer than I anticipated. But appreciate you guys' tolerance to allow me to provide a little bit of insight and testimony on the bill. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, the only thing that I wanted to bring to your attention, and on the surface, I think the bill is good intentioned, but it's like everything is until you start digging into it, you really don't understand the ramifications of how it may impact stuff. So I had LSO do a little bit of research. I was hoping to have a memo prepared for the committee. They weren't able to get that done in time, but the issue that I think that the bill raises to me is when we bring in the definition of government employee in that statute, that goes out and captures every subdivision of state government within the state of Wyoming. So that's 96 municipalities, 23 counties, over 650 special districts, 48 school districts. Within those special districts, it runs the gamut from rural healthcare to weed and pest, conservation districts, hospital districts, the whole gamut. So all of those entities are captured under the bill, and that's fine if we want to use that definition. Where the issue that I see starts to raise is when we deal with the Fair Labor Standards Act that was passed in 1938 that specifies the difference between exempt and non-exempt employees. And what the Fair Labor Standard Act does, and I think most of us are familiar with it, is if you work over 40 hours, if you're a waged employee, you work over 40 hours a week, you get time and a half, comp time, other criteria if those employees are not exempt. The way the bill's drafted in consultation with our staff attorneys probably wouldn't have any implications on those non-exempt employees because they're salaried anyway, and it's kind of hard to be in two places at one time and working unless they were as talented as Senator James, who works all day and legislates all day and works all night. But Mr. Chairman, other than that, what it really gets to is we start getting to those exempt employees under the Fair Labor Standard Act. And those exempt employees include executive exemption, administrative exemptions, professional exemptions, computer employee exemptions, outside sales exemptions, which I don't think would apply to any state employees in this particular case, and then highly compensated employees that make over $100,000, $107,000 a year under the Fair Labor Standards Act. The issue that it raises when we start looking at exempt employees is because we have captured now over 700 subdivisions of state government, all or most all have gone through elections with elected commissioners, in the case of county commissioners, school boards, in the case of school boards, municipalities, in the case of those governing bodies, have all went through general elections, no different than ourselves. those 800 and some subdivisions represent almost 4,100 elected individuals with the state of Wyoming that are responsible for setting the salaries, the employment policies, the determination of who's exempt and who's non-exempt, and what those compensation packages look like. And what it looks like the bill will do, will go in there, and it would include anybody that has a current employment policy that would be as an exempt employee. It would deny them the ability to get compensated. And so let me explain what an exempt employee is. Is they're a salaried employee that have certain levels of responsibility. They're not hourly employees, so they get paid to perform a job. Sometimes that job may take 80 hours a week. Other times it may take 20 hours a week. They're compensated based on job description and the performance through a salary, not an hourly wage. And the way the bill's constructed now, if any of those served in the legislature, it would effectively override any of the employment policies established by those 800 and some subdivisions of state government, and say that those employees would not be eligible for pay, irregardless of whatever arrangement they had with their employer. And so I think that could potentially create some problems out there. I think you all know, just for full disclosure, I'm one of these employees that would be captured underneath this. Initially, it didn't raise an issue, but as I started digging into it, visiting with our staff attorneys, basically said if this law was to go into effect and affect my current employment contract, I'm an at-will employee under a salary that provides a service for a local government, would result in a direct reduction in the amount of money that they could pay me. Because it has nothing to, I'll do the same job. I'm just going to make less money as a result of this bill if it passes out. And so that's the consequences. I think many of us that fall into these exempt positions, you may do the same level of work. You're just not going to get paid for it now under the bill. And so, Mr. Chairman, that's the only thing I wanted to bring to the attention of the committee, is there may be some negative consequences associated with anybody that did fall underneath the Fair Labor Standards Act under that exemption. It seems that's the only place this would apply as far as those 800 plus subdivisions of local governments within the state of Wyoming. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for any questions.
Thank you very much, Senator Hicks. Looks like you got Senator James's attention. So Senator James, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, so that would be a choice that that particular employee would make, just like I make the choice to do this, and I make the choice to take a reduction in pay every time I come to the legislature. And so whether it be a contract, and yes, you would take a reduction in pay, and you would have to budget for that reduction in pay, just like I have to budget for that reduction in pay. And, you know, but it would be your choice. No one forces any of us to run for office. This is our choice. So if you choose to run for office, then that would be your choice to take that reduction in pay. No one is forcing you to. And so it wouldn't bar you from doing it. And so it would just make it equal for everyone while you are here. And that's the whole intent. As a citizen legislature, it is meant to make it equal for everyone and put us all on the same level. Now, that is the whole meaning behind this entire bill, because as a public employee, you should not have the ability to make more than the private sector, because as a private sector employee, we do not have that ability to choose or make more. So unless we choose to use all of our vacation. So that is the ability, that is the intent behind this. So yeah, it's all about choice. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator James. You want to respond, Senator Hicks? And maybe some others have questions for you, but I think there was a question in there.
Yeah, well, I'll see if I can find it.
Don't you agree?
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, it is about choice, and this takes choice away from people. It takes choice and the authority of those 400 or those 4,000 elected representatives to work with their employees to craft employment policies. That's their choice. Some districts, in some cases, do require either reimbursement or a reduction in salary, but that's a local choice that's left up to those local governing boards of those local elected officials. This really does start to take choice away, because I choose to do two jobs, members of the committee. I chose to serve in the legislature, and I also chose to continue to work for the employer under the terms of the contract as an at-will employee that I exercise with them, that's reviewed on an annual basis. I provide the same level of service, whether I was in the legislature or not. And this takes the choice away of me to be able to financially work two jobs and meet those obligations through the stroke of a pen. And so I do agree with Senator James. It's about choice. I just think this forces it to the point where you have no choice. You're taking money away from people, or you're denying them the ability to do two jobs. And that's really what it comes down to. So again, I think the intention's good. Originally, when I read the bill, it made sense, but as you start to dig into the way it's crafted and the implications of it, I think it's a little broader. Conceptually, I agree with my colleague from Sweetwater County. Practically on the implementation of this bill, I think it's problematic. But thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
Thank you. Anybody else have questions for Senator Hicks? Senator James, I don't want to do a long go back and forth, but let's get Senator Schuler and we'll get back to you. That way it just kind of keeps it from being a little less people at each other. Senator Schuler, you go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the good Vice President pretty much covered really what I tried to mention at the very beginning, that yeah, we all do make choices, and I do think that even though I understand the intent of the bill, I think that with all of the districts that are out there, and as the good senator from Baggs mentioned, that we're not just talking school district folks. You get into special districts, you get into so many different things with this, and that's why I said public money. Sure, we need to be careful with it. We need to be cautious with it, and that's why I brought up even the idea of federal subsidies, because I think we forget about that. And even though maybe that's not our business as state legislators to worry about the federal subsidies, they still get them, and that's really taxpayer money. So if you start looking at all the different occupations that are subsidized, it's a sticky wicket. And so I just think this brings up way too many issues that could never be fixed with this. And so I'm just asking, I was going to ask Senator Hicks just one more question about, now, you know what, I'll leave it alone. Thanks anyway. Don't you agree? I'll leave it at that.
I think he probably agrees. We don't have to go there. Senator James, you had a follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just wondering, while we're in legislature, while we're doing legislative duties, I'm wondering if we should really be doing two jobs at once, or if we should be doing one job at a time while we're here doing the people's work. If, we should be doing more than one job at a time. That's the question. And if we're only doing one job at a time, if we should be getting paid for two. That'd be my question to the Vice President. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. You can answer that if you like, Senator Hicks, but I think that's all. It's not necessary.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just one comment. Everybody that I know that's in the legislature that has a private business, they're doing two jobs at the same time.
Yeah.
You can't function if you own a business and be in the legislature. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I do think that's pretty universally true, and we really depend on other folks to help carry us. And Senator James, I'm sure you do too, that there are people that carry the load when you're away too. So it's the same for all of us. But so any further questions, discussions? Senator Hicks, you did not bring an amendment. I think originally I thought you were going to bring an amendment. Okay. All right. Is there anybody back in the audience that wants to weigh in again in the attendees? Raise your hand and we'll let you in if there are. If not, we're going to seek a motion and go ahead and work on this bill. I am not seeing any hands raised in the audience. So committee, you've heard the discussion and what's your pleasure? Senator James, I go to you.
I'll move the bill.
Thank you, Senator James. Discussion on the bill? Any more discussion? I'm kind of guessing I kind of know where people come out on this bill, so I don't think we need a lot of discussion. Are there any amendments? All right. Not hearing any amendments. Senator James, I'll give you the last deal. I was just going to have Lavelle call the roll. Are you good, Senator James? Okay. Lavelle, would you please call the roll?
On Senate File 77, Senator Baldwin,
No.
Senator James,
Aye.
Senator Pappas,
No.
Senator Schuler,
No,
and Chairman Case.
Aye. Thank you. Looks like it's a 3-2, so the bill has failed. Thank you, Senator James. I think that, and thanks everybody for the good testimony. It's a good time to take a break. We've been at it for a long time, almost 2 hours. So let's take, my computer says it's 3:21. How about if we come in at 20 to the hour? So 3:40. Okay. And Danielle will just come back at that time. And we have one bill left. We'll take it up. We are not, for everybody out there, we're not going to take up the very last bill, which was ad valorem tax administration, Senate File 69. We'll be taking that one up next week. So we'll come back at 20 to the hour. Thank you. Hello, everybody. We got another minute, I think.
Senator Baldwin, are you in the Capitol or you just have a nice back?
No, I'm in my second office for the day. I'm nowhere near the Capitol until Sunday. I just missed that bear on my desk. I had to get him up for view.
It's a pretty good shot of how your desk looks from the right angle. That's pretty clever.
It's the way it used to look. I'm in a new location this year. I'm on the other side of the
I know, we miss you. I don't know where I'm going to get my prescriptions. Too far to walk over there.
I don't know where I ended up, so I have no idea.
Let's see. I'm trying to remember where it said where your name was. You're there though. Don't worry. Okay, well, let's get started again. And the next bill for our consideration is Senate Joint Resolution 1, and it is called Taxes to Voters. Senator James, you're the prime sponsor on this one too, right? Is that correct?
That's right, Mr. Chairman.
You want to lead us through it?
I do. While the name is very misleading, it is opt taxes to voters. So what this will do is amendment to Article 1, Section 28 of the Constitution. And it's actually fairly simple. It strikes out or their representatives from the Wyoming Constitution and adds by a vote of the majority of electors during a general election. So it'll now read, no tax shall be imposed without a consent of the people by a vote of the majority of electors during a general election. So the purpose of this bill is to give people a vote on any new tax or tax increase. It is also meant to encourage the government to look for other forms of revenue instead of taxes. I'm sure most of you guys have noticed that we have a lot of the same revenue bills coming through the legislature over and over and over again. So I'm looking for new forms of revenue by bringing this type of bill. The legislature, the counties and cities still have to vote on new taxes and tax increases. If the bill fails, nothing happens. If it passes, then it goes to the voters for approval.
Senator James, just on the vernacular there, you said if the bill fails, you're not talking about the bill we're talking about in the committee right now.
Right.
You're talking about proposition put to the voters.
Correct. Yeah. If the tax bill fails.
Yeah. Maybe we should call it something else. I don't know, but.
If the tax bill fails, not this one. Okay. If the proposition fails, then nothing happens.
Gotcha.
If the proposition passes, then it goes on to the voters. So it has to go. So this keeps us a republic, and it goes through the Republican process. So that keeps us the same. So that's the main intent. Also, currently, a lot of people don't have the ability to voice their opinion on taxes because a lot of it happens during business hours. And this will give them the opportunity to voice their opinion at the voting booth. Now they can send emails or call their legislator, but from what I've been hearing when they contact me is their legislator doesn't respond, because I get a lot of calls from around the state, and the main thing that I hear is, oh my God, you answered. So that's a big concern. Also, like I mentioned earlier, this will encourage the legislature, also commissioners and city council, to look for other forms of revenue, like bringing in new businesses and cutting spending. So that is the main 3 points behind bringing this type of resolution. So, and another concern that I have heard about bringing this resolution is that it will violate Article 4, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution. And that says the U.S. shall guarantee to every state in the Union a Republican form of government. And Republican form of government is defined as the supreme power is held by the citizens, our bosses, to vote, and is exercised by elected officers and representatives governing according to law. When, in my opinion, when the elected officers and representatives are not doing what is in the best interest of the people, then the people should have the ability to vote on subjects that will impact their lives. And right now, and in the past, the officers and representatives have not been doing what's in the best interest of the people, because best interest is bringing in more businesses, right? And the only thing they've been really trying to do is extraction industry and taxes. Well, we need to bring in an actual diverse economy, which hasn't been happening. So I'm hoping that this will encourage that diverse economy that we so badly need. So I stand for any questions on this resolution.
Thank you very much, Senator James. Questions for Senator James? Who wants to start? Questions by the committee? Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Certainly, again, I understand the intent. I believe that it's important for our constituents to have a voice, and obviously during the pandemic, we've seen a situation that's reared its ugly head, where we have not had a lot of diverse taxing ability, and we've ridden the tails of the extraction industry to the point we can't do that anymore. So we obviously are in a situation we've got to cut, and everyone knows that. And I think as legislators, we'll get it done, at least as best we can. But I'm also one of those that thinks we have to think out of the box a little bit and come up with some ideas for revenue. And I was just looking at a deal. I can't remember which committee sent this out, but it kind of estimated all of the states around us and what our estimated tax capacity is. We really are one of the lowest tax states in the country. So when I hear the fact that legislators haven't been doing their jobs, the only thing that I think legislators haven't been doing is they haven't been looking outside the box and trying to find some other ways to develop revenue, rather than just depending on our extractive industries. But we have no income tax, no corporate tax. Our property taxes are some of the lowest in the country. Our sales and use tax are next to the bottom. Our fuel tax is towards the bottom. I mean, it's not like we've been taxing the heck out of Wyoming residents. I mean, no one likes to pay taxes, but I think for the amount of services that we get in our state, we've been taxed very little in terms of other states. And I'm just looking mainly at the states around us: Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Nebraska, North and South Dakota, and Utah. Just that comparison of those states alone puts us at a pretty low taxing capacity. So I understand your intent, but I guess my question is, in a situation like this year with the pandemic, where everything came to the forefront, gas prices were low, we had the pandemic, market values of everything fell because we couldn't export our products. Businesses had to stop. If we had to wait for the next general election to be able to try and pass some type of tax revenue situation to help our state, I don't think we'll ever be in the situation like some of the folks back east, but it could put us in kind of a precarious position. My feeling is, and I don't know what you think about this, but I guess, and this could be to anyone, but particularly you for Senator James, is it seems to me that we already have what we need for the taxpayers. We have the ability at the voting, at the polls for them to vote us out if they don't like what we're doing. To me, that seems more important than trying to put something that might be as complex as a taxing issue every 4 years or whatever towards the people. I think they should have power. I agree. The power is in their hands. They are our bosses. They are constituents. But I think they also have to give us a little bit of credit that we will make the best decisions we can based on whatever information we have. So I guess I'm asking, do you think it's more important that we wait and do a general election and let the people have the say, or do you think that when they elect us, that they give us that opportunity to use our best judgment with what we think is best in terms of taxes? Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Schuler. Senator James, if you'd like to respond, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Given what's happened when this first hit, we didn't lay off or stop paying government employees. We actually had a really low government employee layoff. There was more private sector unemployment. And when it comes to private sector closure, those private sector is the one that pays for public sector. So that was the wrong step. Also, as well, we should have left it to, I'm sorry, there were some other comments in there that I'm just now spacing that. Oh man. When it comes to how it's funded, I apologize.
We can come back to you, Senator James.
Yeah.
Okay, no worries. Well, committee, anything else for the committee? We probably got a buku bunch of testimony, so let's get those hands up out there and we'll get you guys working, earn your pay today. So, well, there are quite a few hands. I don't know if you guys can see the hands, but let's just start letting them in. At least 4 or 5 of them, then we'll get 4 or 5 more, Danielle. Otherwise, our screens get so small we can't see ourselves. I can see that we've got Mr. Hamilton. He's coming online. We'll go to you first, and then how about Mr. Merrill? And then how about Mr. Mullen? And then we'll get another batch. How's that? Mr. Hamilton, welcome. Hi, cousin.
How are you, sir? Thank you,
okay.
Mr. Chairman. Ken Hamilton with the Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. Our organization has a policy that is very similar to something this proposal here. Mm-hmm. And I think that this does make good sense. And part of the discussion that our members have is that, we're traditionally been resistant to tax increases, but we've left that resistance off where we allow the people to make a vote on that. Now, I would suggest that while we're looking at this as perhaps something that would stand in the way of instituting new taxes or getting new taxes, that wouldn't always be the case. And I know in numerous situations where you've had taxing issues go to the public in various localities, that those localities do end up supporting those taxes. So while the argument is there that this certainly is going to be something that perhaps puts a little bit of a break on things, I don't think that it necessarily would mean that nobody would ever increase taxes or vote for a tax increase. But I think the critical part of this that we need to focus on is it does give those folks an opportunity to have a say on that. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to give you a lot more stuff here because I think a lot of you have thought about this and probably have your own opinions on it. But I certainly support this effort, and I think it would be important to the type of government we have in Wyoming. Be happy to answer any questions if I can.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hamilton. So, and committee, I call him cousin because we're not really cousins, but we had a doorman that confused us for probably 10 years. And so he never could tell the difference. I also got confused with Senator Hinchy. So, but anyway, welcome, Mr. Hamilton. Questions for Mr. Hamilton? Have any questions? Mr. Hamilton, thank you for your testimony. Mr. Merrill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Chris Merrill, Executive Director of the Equality State Policy Center. I'm here today to speak in opposition to this resolution. It's our perspective that this would be an inappropriate and frankly, fiscally irresponsible approach to tax policy. Questions of taxation and tax policy rest squarely on the shoulders of the legislature and the governor, and this is how it should be. One could argue that addressing questions about taxation is one of your primary responsibilities. This is the hard work you're elected to do, and these are the hard decisions that we elect you to make. And I think as most longtime legislators understand, Mr. Chairman, especially those who have served on this committee for a few years, tax policy and questions of taxation can be incredibly complex and nuanced. Everything is more complicated than we want it to be. New information emerges all the time. Circumstances can change quickly, and it's important for a state to be able to be as nimble and respond as quickly as possible to changing circumstances and to balance the budget in a responsible way. We, the people, rely on you as legislators, and especially those who serve on this committee, to develop a pretty high level of knowledge and expertise when it comes to taxes. Often you need to parse through what's done in other states and what appears to be the outcomes of those decisions. You need to understand what tax rates are competitive with other nearby comparable states. You need to have a grasp of some of the most significant unintended and potential consequences that can come along with different types of tax policies and tax codes. And we rely on you to consistently hear from stakeholders, consistently gather new information, work to improve our policies. And this proposed resolution before you would short circuit that essential work. And it would shift the burden of this work onto the people, which would be unrealistic at best. And in my personal opinion, probably pretty darn irresponsible. It would be the opposite of leadership. And we vote for our elected representatives to represent us in the legislature and provide leadership whenever necessary. And so because of that, we oppose this proposed resolution. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll conclude my testimony, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Merrill. Questions for Mr. Merrill? Any questions? Anybody? Thank you, Mr. Merrill. Danielle, you might let in about 3 more. And then Mr. Merrill and Mr. Hamilton, we're going to boot you out just so we have room so we can see everybody. And then if you raise your hand again, you'll get let in. It's okay. We don't worry. So it's Mr. Mullen.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you. My name is Tate Mullen. I'm the Government Relations Director for the Wyoming Education Association. I'm here today to speak in opposition to this resolution. So I'm going to echo some of the comments that Chris Merrill had laid out in a value-based discussion, as well as some of the policy-based discussions. So as Chris noted, this is an abdication of legislative fiscal responsibility, and it is asking citizens to take on this heavy burden. So as Senator Kinski had noted in a previous committee working through the white rod and the goldenrod, we know, and you as legislators all know, that working through a budget is extremely difficult, and it takes even new legislators a couple of years to formalize themselves with the process and to formalize themselves with all the accounts, the way the money moves, and for us to expect or have this level of expectation that citizens can, at the whim, take on this role of a state budget analyst is irresponsible. It is the legislature's duty to perform these roles, and it is an abdication of that legislative fiscal responsibility. Moving into the policy-related arguments, previously my time in Colorado, I worked as a budget analyst for Jefferson County, looking at the impacts of Tabor on state service provision and county service provision. Now, Tabor is known as a tax expenditure limitation bill. Tax expenditure limitation bills come in a variety of formats, including legislative supermajority, ones that rely on CPI and population calculations, as well as citizen majority. And this is a citizen majority tax expenditure limitation bill. So the goal of most tax expenditure limitation bills, despite some of the titling in them, like Tabor's called the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, but the goal of tax expenditure limitation bills is largely to reduce government spending and slow the growth of government. Well, as we know in the state of Wyoming, we do not have a spending problem. What we have is a revenue problem in the state. And tax expenditure limitation bills have proven very, very problematic for service provisions, including healthcare and education. In the state of Colorado, they saw their education system plummet because of their TEL Tabor. There is a real disconnect. I'd like to kind of echo some of the comments of Senator Schuler. A lot of our Wyoming citizens, we love our services, right? We like our roads cleared, we like our schools well funded, but there's a disconnect in how we receive those service provisions, where those dollars come from, right? Professor Godby's most recent presentation of his statewide survey findings reflect this, right? At the utmost concern for Wyoming residents was K through 12 funding, followed right by the concern to not increase taxes. Well, that just also demonstrates that there is a disconnect between how you receive those services and how they're paid for. The other problem is with the growth issue. Tax expenditure limitation bills are meant to slow growth, government growth. The fact of the matter is that science does not back this at all. Colorado is another great example. What happens is you see the rapid growth of special districts. This disproportionately impacts low-income families and neighborhoods as those areas that are able to and willing to pass tax measures to either build new schools, fire stations, fix their roads in their communities are able to do so, while low-income families and residents aren't able to do so in their districts. So again, this is an irresponsible tax bill. We need to make sure that our legislators are the ones who are really determining tax policy and moving that forward. With that, I'll stand for any questioning.
Thank you very much. Questions for Mr. Mullen? Any questions for Mr. Mullen? Thank you, Mr. Mullen. Commissioner Bell, welcome. Or should we go to Jeremiah first? Jeremiah, what's the plan?
Mr.
Association or the commissioner?
Well, I'd never like to get in front of an elected official. So if Commissioner Bell would like to go first, I'm happy to defer to him, but I do have comments.
I think that's very wise. Commissioner Bell, welcome. You got to unmute, sir. If you froze up, maybe I froze up.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Times on this, it says unstable connection. So bear with me. If you're having problems, I'll turn it over to.
Sometimes those things come and go. So
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay. Rusty Bell, Campbell County Commissioner. And if you're not getting much of this, please let me know. Okay, so certainly the Commissioners Association, WCCA, is strongly opposed to this. Really having some issue, the logistics on some of these things, and really the mill levies that we set every year. But we're actually changing a tax every single year. It seems to me like the logistics of this are difficult. So I'm having a little bit of problems with this bill, just because it seems like the implementation would be fire districts, even a commission, weed and pest districts, all of those who might lower their mill levy a little bit, raise their mill levy a little bit, that going to a general election, just, it really doesn't even make sense. I'm not even how, certainly when you guys are ready to talk about, I did hear Senator James and even diversity, and certainly the tax structure in Wyoming, I don't believe to economic diversity unless you're taking something out of the ground. So I would certainly love to talk to you guys more about now. I don't understand how it is going to work, to be honest with you, with the special districts that we have. For that, and I'll turn it over to Jeremiah to finish up on the things that certainly he's going to touch on things I didn't.
Thank you, Commissioner Bell. Questions for Commissioner Bell? I think we got about 90% of what you said, Commissioner. There might be a couple things we didn't get. So, but it's trouble up there in Campbell County. Even the internet's bad, I know. So, but thank you. Any questions for Commissioner Bell? Let's go to Jeremiah Riemann.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. I appreciate Commissioner Bell's comments. I'll enhance a few of those and then try and hit a few other points. As the good commissioner mentioned, our association is strongly opposed to this bill. I think it creates a number of untold complications and consequences. Commissioner Bell talked about mill levies. Those are adjusted every year and have the potential to go up and down. And they do, and are not necessarily 100% in every situation. This would force all of those decisions to go to a general election, which I also kind of brings me to my second point in the notion that this has the potential to create a situation where taxes remain higher than they necessarily need to be in a particular jurisdiction. If we approved it at a certain level at one point in time, and under current system, next year commissioners can reduce that if the circumstances warrant. But under this proposal, we would have to wait until the next general election to reduce that taxing potential. To Senator Schuler's point earlier, we are concerned that this could present a situation where we're not responsive to the needs of our communities. If a pandemic comes about, if we have a particular project in our community, we have so much growth that we need to have a new fire station, new water systems, whatever that might be, we've hindered the voters' ability to consider those particular circumstances. Mr. Chairman, I'm also concerned about the increased general election costs. No doubt our general election ballot would be significantly longer than it exists today. And maybe that's not a tremendous burden, but I suspect for our clerks and others that take care of our elections, we're adding to the administrative responsibilities they have. I'm also concerned about the potential to introduce or the fact that we're going to have to educate more people and spend money in order to put every single one of these initiatives onto a ballot. And we're talking about, county, state, mill levies, and an untold number of proposals that are going to be going into every single one of those elections. Mr. Chairman, Senator James, I hear you when you talk about those 9 to 5 workers, but like many others have stated, our electors elect professionals, whether those be commissioners, board members of the various special districts, city council members, state legislators, the governor, and others to evaluate and consider these issues. So I do think that their issues, their needs are being considered as it comes forward. Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Bell did talk about other forms of revenue. What I hear when I hear that is that counties should be more entrepreneurial. And I think the fact is we don't want counties to be business, to replace the private sector here. We have a lane and we need to stick in it. And our lane is through tax proposals when it's appropriate. Commissioner Bell talked about economic diversification. When I hear that we should be recruiting more businesses, I think we need a more diverse tax structure in order to actually benefit from those companies rather than adding burden unless it's a mineral industry. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for questions, but we certainly do oppose this bill as it's proposed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Riemann. Questions from the committee? Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Riemann, so as an elected official, I hear a lot from the people, and people don't want that. People don't want a more diverse tax structure. They want more private sector businesses. They want jobs. They want they don't care about more taxes. They don't want what you are talking about. So we don't care. And you talk about significantly more cost to the ballot. I'm wondering what evidence you have of this, because I'm not seeing it when I've talked to the county clerks. And when it comes to lowering taxes, that doesn't apply. It's only new taxes and tax increases. I've mentioned that multiple times when I've talked about this. So decreasing, please decrease as much as you want. The constituents would love that, which is why I made sure to mention that. So yeah, when it comes to bringing in the businesses, we need more of that. Also, we're not here to expand government at all. We're here to expand private sector. So those are my comments in regards to your statements. Thank you.
Mr. Riemann, it was directed at you, so you certainly can respond if you'd like.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator James, what I'm responding to in terms of the entrepreneurial development, and we agree with you in terms of wanting to bring more businesses into our communities to provide more opportunities. What I was responding to is your contention that is the way that we generate additional revenue. And what I'm suggesting is that our tax structure, as it stands today, would only prove to add additional burden to county responsibilities, to local responsibilities, to state responsibilities in order to accommodate those new businesses unless something changes in terms of our tax structure. Mr. Chairman, Senator James, in terms of the election costs, what I'm indicating is that a belief, and I don't come with evidence, but a belief that you are adding to the administrative responsibilities for carrying out those elections, and a belief that ultimately you're adding burden on all parties, not just on local governments or the state, in order to introduce and bring forward these proposals. I certainly believe that is evidenced elsewhere around the country. Mr. Chairman, Senator James, as I read your bill, what it says is that no tax shall be imposed. It says nothing about increasing or decreasing. So if we want to impose a lower tax under your proposal, as I read it, we would have to take that to the voters. There is no pass that's offered to local governments. I hope that's responsive to your questions.
Thank you very much. I'd like to take a moment to observe the fact that there are so many bald heads in this video, and that Senator James, you have the most hair, and I think maybe McLaren has the next, and then Jeremiah, and then the rest, we're just out of luck. So, I think we need to take a deep breath sometimes, and it's a tough job being the legislature. These are tough issues, and I appreciate people being dogged about it, even if they lack hair, maybe. So, Mr. McLaren, I think it's your turn, and then we'll go to Ms. Taylor, who has plenty of hair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to repeat what was said previously, but would agree with all of it. We don't believe this is necessary. WHAM believes that, we elect city council members, county commissioners, and we expect them to do their job, whether that's raise taxes, lower taxes. And it's been my experience over the last 25 years that when the voters don't like what elected officials are doing, they replace them. And so that's how you affect tax policy that you want. The other thing I would tell you, at least in cities and towns, citizens have the ability to do an initiative or to referendum an ordinance. So if there's a tax policy by ordinance, that can be overturned by the citizens. So we don't believe it's necessary. And finally, there is nothing that would preclude a city from holding an election to say, we will like to impose this tax. We want to put it on the ballot to see. And I've done that in my previous job in Colorado, and said, we want to do this if the voters approve. And the voters approved, and we didn't have to do it, but the city council wanted to put that on the ballot. So that's an option for at least the cities and towns. And I guess the last thing I would say with respect to economic diversification, we're all for that. I think everybody's for that. And I would agree with Mr. Riemann that we need to stay in our lane, but I would refer you back to a study that the Wyoming Taxpayers Association did a couple of years ago. For every job that was brought into the state of Wyoming outside the mineral industry, it cost the state of Wyoming, I think the number was $27,000 a year between the taxes that were paid and the services that were delivered. Now that study's probably 4 or 5 years old now, and it probably needs to be updated. But anyway, Mr. Chairman, WHAM stands in opposition to this bill. Thank you, sir. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. McLaren. Any questions for Mr. McLaren? Not seeing any. Thank you very much. Ms. Taylor, welcome.
Hi, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Erin Taylor, and I'm here today representing the Wyoming Association of Community College Trustees. We are a trade association representing all 49 trustees, 7 each at your 7 community colleges. And the reason I'm here today is that this bill just really flagged a conversation with my board of directors, which is comprised of 2 trustees from each college. And their thoughts really do mirror some of those that you've heard today from our friends at the Education Association and the county commissioners and the cities and towns. Simply this gets Wyoming away from a representative government, and that is why we elect people to make those decisions. Secondly, it then limits those elected officials the ability to respond in times of crisis. And I think we've seen a lot of that conversation in the last few years, both with budgetary crises, economic forces, and global health crises in our state and the impacts of those. And thirdly, I think it's important, it's been touched on, taking something like this and moving it forward to the vote of the people who in our state arguably don't pay. I mean, we've all seen the chart that shows what you get for what you pay. And I think it's just maybe not the right time for something like this. But it takes away from the people who've been elected to make those decisions. So I'm not going to belabor the point anymore because you've heard from lots of other people on it, but I wanted to share the points of view from the trustees and some of the concerns that they had moving into this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. A question for Ms. Taylor? Questions? Okay, no questions for Ms. Taylor. I'm looking out at the attendees and I'm not seeing any hands up at this time. So what we might do is, Senator James, we might go back to you for a wrap up and then elicit a motion on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just would like to point out that I have heard from many individuals and people throughout the state, and a lot of people were very happy with this bill. A lot of voters were happy about this bill, about finally being able to have a voice on the financial burden that would be placed upon them. And I noticed today that a lot of government were speaking out against this bill, and that was no surprise that government would be speaking out against this because they might have another layer of another layer that would prevent them from being able to get more funding. So that was no surprise. So take that into consideration when you're voting on this, that government is opposed to getting more funding while people are happy about being able to have more voice and decision on whether or not this financial burden is placed upon them. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator James. I'm re-looking at the attendee list. I'm not seeing anybody with a hand raised. You could click now and okay, I'm not seeing anybody. So committee, I think we've heard the testimony. What is your pleasure? Senator James, I'll go to you.
I'll move the bill.
Thank you, Senator James. Motion's been made by Senator James. Discussion on the bill. Any discussion on the bill? Senator James, I'm not seeing any discussion. I think you just had your last word. Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay. So with that, we'll have Lavelle call the roll.
On Senate Joint Resolution 1, Senator Baldwin,
No.
Senator James,
Aye.
Senator Pappas,
No. No.
Senator Schuler,
No.
and Chairman Case.
No. So thank you very much, committee. Senator James, thank you for bringing those bills. Committee, good work today. Maybe not everybody thinks that, but I appreciate you putting your shoulder down. We will see you down in Cheyenne, and we will probably have a meeting either Tuesday or Thursday, depending on what happens, what's assigned. And I appreciate having you on the committee and your good attentiveness. So with that, anything good for the order? I think we're good. All right. We're adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you, Danielle, and thank you, Lavelle.
Senator Case, are you going to stay online?